Welcome to this discussion. We're going to talk about performance management, but we're going to take it from the perspective of how to help your employees attain peak performance. Most of the performance management and performance appraisal training that's out there is really geared around how to use the forms and how do you have the conversations and how do you do the boring stuff and the mechanical pieces. Really, if you want to take your organization to the next level, it starts with your people. You'll hear me say over and over again that the organization is only as good as the people that work for it. So if you want to take your organization to the next level, you've got to take your people to the next level. And that's not collective, that's individually. So how do you do that? And that's really where performance management can come in. Now, this presentation is really just a synopsis perspective. Right? We're going to spend a few minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, talking about performance management. This is the summary version of a half-day course that I typically offer to managers, where we learn about strategies and mechanics and also the techniques to really make this thing work for organizations. So let's start with this first question, right? Do performance appraisals work? I'm going to be the first one to tell you no, absolutely not. Now, anybody who has an HR background or who's listened to HR for years talk about how essential performance appraisals are, they're all cringing right now. So they're saying, how on earth can you say that performance appraisals don't work? Well, I'm going to throw in a caveat. They don't work if they're the only tool that's used to manage performance. You see, performance appraisals need to be part of a bigger system where you're managing performance throughout the year. If the performance appraisal is really the only time that you're talking about performance, informally or formally, I don't care what the form looks like. I don't care how well it's designed or how pretty it looks or what the contents are. A once-a-year performance appraisal isn't going to cut it. Now, if it's combined with a year-round performance management system, sure, then it works great. It becomes the capstone to it. However, by themselves, they don't work. So really, why do we do them? Every time that I say performance management or performance appraisals, most managers and supervisors cringe thinking about HR being on their back, getting them done, doing it right, getting all the signatures, blah, blah, blah. I talk to the employees and they're not all that excited because they know that the supervisor's not that excited. They see it as a process, just a hoop to jump through in order to get some kind of a pay increase, even if pay increases aren't part of the program. So why do we do them, right? Why do we do them, and what are the biggest benefits to them? So first of all, let's take a look at from the employee side. For the employees, the performance appraisals tied into a year-round performance management system can really give them the direction that they need. It creates a sense of job security because employees can know that what they're doing and how they're performing is meeting expectations. It also provides an opportunity to recognize your employees for great performance, and this is something that employees need and they thrive on. Career development is essential. People are either going forwards or they're going backwards. People don't just stand still. And so when we take a look at performance management, here's an opportunity for us to identify what needs to be done, where the employee wants to go, himself or herself, and let's put some pieces in place to help them develop themselves, whether that be internal training, external training, job opportunities, or some other kind of development opportunities. Let's put those pieces into place. And this also serves as an early recognition system for problems that might come up. And so if we can catch things early on, we can nip it in the bud. You see, when we talk about performance problems or challenges, what I have found is this. About 85% of all performance problems can be dealt with just by simply talking to the individual. Most employees who are poor performers or performing incorrectly or behaving incorrectly, most of them are doing it because they don't know that what they're doing is not acceptable. And so if you're silent as a manager and as a supervisor, they're just guessing and they're trying to go through and use their clairvoyance to the best of their ability, but it's not going to work. So through active performance management, as we share things with others through the conversation process, this is going to be a great way for us to nip things and take care of them early on for both of us. From the manager's perspective, right, performance management and the appraisals included, but performance management as a year-round system helps to change the behavior of the employees. It helps to clarify what's expected, give them feedback along the way so that you can work together towards the goals that you've set. You can increase the motivational factor for the employees because they are clearer in terms of their understanding of what your expectations are, and they know whether or not their performance is meeting your expectations. This lowered frustration typically results in a reduced turnover and increased promotional opportunities too as people advance and move ahead. Now, some supervisors will say, why should I invest all this time and energy into these employees if all they're going to do is try and get another job in another department? Well, here's the key. Those employees are going to go somewhere, right? And whether you provide them the resources or not is going to determine how long they stay with you, and it's also going to determine whether or not they stay within the organization or not. Knowing that they're going to leave at some point, because this is a transient work group that we're dealing with these days, right? The more opportunities you give them, the greater emphasis you provide in terms of training opportunities, development opportunities, the longer they're going to stay with you. But even when they do leave, at least they're leaving inside, to go somewhere else inside the organization, rather than taking all of their new skill sets to competitors. And then finally, we have that minimization of legal exposure. As we do this correctly and we set the expectations clearly and we give the feedback and we document what we do, this is going to help protect us. That's the caveat to make HR happy. Now let me introduce to you a model of what we're talking about and how this thing works. This is a performance system that I've developed over the last 15 years. It's very simple. It's definitely not complicated, not complex, but really this is where we make the difference. As we build a foundation upon which we can rest the appraisal on, then it's going to work. But the appraisal by itself isn't going to be able to hold up. So as we start to take a look at this model, right, we're not going to start with the appraisal, but we do need to ask that primary question: what are we trying to accomplish, right? What do you want to do as a result of your performance appraisal and performance management process? If the only reason is to document performance and to be compliant and make HR happy, then that's what you're going to do. It's not going to be a very effective management tool to help motivate individual performance and take people to another level. If instead we could shift the focus on the employees, how do we improve their capabilities? How do we increase their performance? How do we improve their behavior? Right? It starts to change things. It starts to shift the nature of how performance management works. Imagine if we actually focused on the employee and trying to figure out how to help him or her achieve peak performance as the first and foremost purpose behind performance management. Imagine what that does as it shifts the focus from simple compliance and the documentation aspect to the employee, him or herself. And what we'll find is that as we take care of the people, the compliance side takes care of itself. See, what this means though is that by taking an employee-centric approach, it's going to be taking on more of a coaching approach. Rather than the strict supervisor-subordinate relationship, we instead create a coaching relationship. Think about a coach. If you've played sports, you understand it well, or if you have coached, think about it. The coach is not going to be out there on the field playing. Now, I use football as my analogy because I coached youth football for 12 years. And so from a coaching perspective, there are many, many times that I just wanted to get out there on the field and play myself, but that wasn't going to happen. And I don't think the parents of those 10-year-old kids would really appreciate me being out there on the field and playing against their kid. So anyway, right, but from a coaching perspective, my entire emphasis is to help get the team to meet a certain goal. And so it's about coaching individuals to help them achieve peak performance individually and as a team so that we could meet the goals more effectively. So the entire emphasis was not about me, the coach. The entire emphasis was about them, the players, the team. And so as we focus on this, right, as we focus and shift our focus on our employees, it changes the game. What this does is it really shifts the focus from the past to the future. I use the analogy of driving, right? That there's a reason why the windshield is at least 10 times larger than the rearview mirror. Yes, the rearview mirror is important so that we're aware of what's behind us, but it's far more important for us to understand what's ahead of us so that we can manage the road, we can manage our driving and make the adaptation as we need to as we go along. Same thing happens with performance. We can't change anything that's happened in the past. We can learn from it and we can figure out some new ways to avoid mistakes in the future. But really the emphasis here, similar to coaching, is to focus on the future, right? We take what we learn, we apply it, we learn our lessons, some of those lessons are painful, and what we're going to do is try and figure out how can we use those lessons so we don't make the same mistakes in the future, and how can we improve our performance moving ahead. And so what happens is that from a coaching perspective, right, the coach doesn't only come out and coach the players once a week or once a month or once a year and tell them everything that they could possibly need to know at the start of the season and then say, hey, good luck. Coaching is constant. It's regular. It's an ongoing process, and it's not just a game time either. It's during the practices where you're not only talking to the group collectively, but you're also taking aside each individual to say, hey, let's talk about this. Let's figure out how to improve this. The feedback's got to be ongoing, and it's got to be immediate. So what this does is that the role changes, right? So instead of being the boss of the judge, the jury, the evaluator, right? Instead, you shift over to become coach, and they're your key players. The employee's perspective also changes from a passive recipient of feedback, just saying, all right, lay it on me, tell me what I'm doing wrong, to somebody who's empowered, where they can help to craft their own personal career. But what this also requires is that HR takes on a different role as well. Instead of taking on the compliance cop or a policy police approach, they need to become the coach of coaches. They need to teach the coaches how to coach, and that takes a different skill set. So let's figure out where we go, and let's build this foundation. And we're going to start here. In order for this entire system to work, it starts right here with the first base of our foundation, and that is, how do we set expectations? What we need to do before we begin is to identify what we want and where we need to go. We need to identify our team goals, the functional goals, organizational goals, and then bring it down to individual goals. As we identify those goals, then we can do a better job at aligning individuals with the organizational goals. You see, when we can connect individuals to not just their job description, but also the department goals and the organization's goals, once they understand what their role is in helping to accomplish those goals and objectives, it can make all the difference in the world. It really can, right? If they are only focused on their job, their individual specific job and role as a contributor, it's nice, but really what becomes passionate is when they can see that what they're doing is making a bigger difference. And as they understand the role that they're playing and help the organization achieve goals, you see an increase in morale, you see an increase in motivation, an increase in passion as employees really want to be part of the bigger picture. So how do you start, right? As you set your expectations, it's not just enough to say, hey, go to work. You've got to be specific, right? We've got to follow SMART goals and SMART expectations. SMART, of course, is the acronym. So what does SMART stand for? We need to set expectations and objectives that are specific, measurable, attainable, related to the job, and time-driven. When it comes to specific expectations, understand this. Nothing is dynamic unless it's specific. If you want dynamic performance, you've got to be specific in what expectations are required of the individual. Let them know where they need to get to and how to get there, right? If there's some area where they need to provide their own judgment, their expertise, and create some latitude, spell that out for them. At the same time, it's important to make your expectations measurable, so everybody knows where the finish line is, and we can know when we've reached the finish goal, when we've gone past the finish goal, and if we haven't reached the finish goal yet, just how far off that we are. We also need to make sure that our goals are attainable. Setting stretch goals are one thing, but setting mission impossible goals is something else. So we've got to be realistic about it, and the goals need to be related to the job. It's okay to have some special assignments and some things that take them outside of their normal job description, but really the employee needs to understand that what they're doing is related to the job. Otherwise you're going to see them less than motivated and definitely discouraged to help you out. Once we've set the expectations, and this is an ongoing process too, we're then going to deliver some feedback. And this has got to be an active process, not just something that we wait till the end of the year to give as part of our performance appraisal process. Feedback is going to provide you with indicators to the employees. It's going to tell them that you care, that the organization cares about them. It's also going to clarify exactly where they stand. Is what they're doing what they need to be doing? Does their performance meet expectations? Are they going in the right direction? What this does then is it's going to continue to motivate your employees to continue to work harder. They're going to understand that what they're doing is great. They feel excited about it. They're going to keep on going. In cases where you need to correct the performance, right? We need to make some adjustments. As we strive to clarify the expectations and help the employee understand exactly what's expected, how to do it, and where they need to get to, that's going to also create greater clarity, which also enhances the motivational factor. But this feedback is also an early warning system. That way, as we are aware of performance and we're able to share our perspectives of performance with the employee, we're able to catch most performance problems early. It's like I mentioned before, 85% of your performance problems will be solved by simply bringing up and confronting it right away. The longer you put it off, however, the less likely it is that things are going to change. Now, in order to make this thing work, here's some criteria. First of all, it's got to be immediate. Understand this. The value of feedback diminishes with time. Let me say that again. The value of feedback diminishes with time. The longer you put off giving the feedback to the employee, the less it means to them. And so if it's positive feedback where you're saying, hey, great job, and you tell them what they did a great job on, if that happens right away after the fact, they typically recognize that you're paying attention to them and you recognize what they're doing. By waiting a week or two or longer, what it tells them is, yeah, you kind of know what's going on, but you're really not that in tuned. It's not a big motivator. Corrective feedback, it works the same way. With corrective feedback, if it's something that we correct right away, then it's going to get their attention, and they typically provide greater priority in making the fix. If, however, we put it off, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, the longer we put it off, the more it communicates to the employee that, yeah, it's wrong, but it's obviously not that big of a deal because it took me so long to get back to you on it. So those are some considerations. Make sure that your feedback is objective, or at least as objective as possible. Stay away from targeting the individual and making it personal. Anytime that we say you are, or when that you do this, you are that, it gets people defensive. If instead we can talk about the behavior, the performance separate from the person, we can say, hey, when you do this and you perform this way, this is what happens. This is the result, this is et cetera, et cetera. What we're doing is we're separating the performance or behavior from the person. People tend to be a lot more acceptable of that approach and a lot less defensive. Another recommendation is to avoid what we call the sandwich approach. You know the sandwich approach, where you say something good, you say something bad, then you say something good, right? Because we want them to feel good about it. We'll understand this. After 30 years of observing the sandwich approach at work, it doesn't work. It really doesn't, right? Why is that? Because, number one, if an employee hears a great job, and then something in the middle that's corrective, blah, 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 and then another great job, they may just focus on the great job piece. Yeah, there was something in there that needs to be corrected, but really they like me, and so I can just keep on doing what I'm doing. And on the other side, however, they may hear the good things, waiting for the bad news. So as the bad news comes, they're going to focus on that bad news, and they're going to recognize that the only time you're going to give them a compliment is when something bad is coming. And so what that's going to do is reduce the effectiveness of your ability to provide compliments and positive feedback, because the employee will quite simply be waiting for you to jump from around the corner to say, yeah, but, right? You did great, but. So anyway, as you communicate regularly with your employees, it's going to make a good difference. Along with the expectations following the SMART model, you should also follow a SMART pattern with your feedback. Make sure it's specific so they know exactly what you're giving them a compliment on or what you're correcting. Make sure that it's measurable, that it's observable, that they know that you've seen it, that you recognize the improvements or the challenges that are being faced. Make sure that you focus on the attributes of the performance. Make sure that you clarified how you appreciated that they did it. Link it to the relationship to their job, how what they're doing is connecting back, or what they're doing is making a difference within the organization. And then again, as we talked about before, there's the timeliness of the feedback. Now, when we get into the coaching process and providing feedback, let me throw out this first caveat. Most people refer to feedback as two types, right? The first one is positive feedback, and others will refer to the second kind as negative feedback. Personally, if the feedback is given the right way, I don't think there's such a thing as negative feedback. I do think there's such a thing as corrective feedback, where we need to give them feedback to correct their performance or their behavior or some kind of action that's being taken. So from my perspective, I see the opportunity for positive feedback to give kudos where they're deserved, and also corrective feedback to be able to correct that performance and get it back on track. So as you coach, right, this has got to be an ongoing process. My recommendation is that you do it on an informal basis, but a continual basis. You don't have to call them into the office to give them just regular coaching. You can manage by wandering around, you can visit with them, you can give them compliments on the fly, you can also give them coaching opportunities on the fly. There may be some kind of conversation in writing, if you need to document it, if the feedback is such where they're not paying attention to it and they're not making the corrections that they need to. So you may need to get a little bit more formalized, but it's really an ongoing process. Be sure to not just have those coaching sessions that focus on the negative or the corrective. Also have those coaching sessions where you just simply walk in and give them compliments. Yeah, it may throw them off a little bit the first time you do it, but they'll definitely and gladly adapt. But do make sure that this is a routine process. What you don't want to do is have them wonder what's wrong or what's going on. The more you do this, the more regularly you do this, the better relationship that you build with them. As a general rule of thumb, remember this: you should praise in public and correct in private. Now, most people are okay with you throwing them kudos in front of their peers. There are a handful who don't like that, so you'll need to be sensitive to that. However, most people do enjoy getting some kudos in front of other people. For some, it's just getting the compliment is great and having somebody else overhear it. Others like the pomp and circumstance. You'll need to kind of play it by ear, but do praise in public. It's okay to praise in private as well, but you want to make sure that they know that you're sharing with other people just how well they're doing. On the critique side, right, be sure that as you correct people that you're going to correct them in private. Everybody wants to save face and nobody wants to be embarrassed, and it's very demeaning if they get coached a little strongly in front of their peers, so be sensitive to that. All right, so we've set the expectations, we've been giving feedback. As we go back and forth through this throughout the year, what we're doing is we're holding our employees accountable. We set the expectations in an ongoing basis. We're giving them feedback along the way, but as we give them feedback, right, in comes this accountability factor. This takes some time, it really does. But what you're going to find is that over time, it's going to be easier to lay the foundations of the expectations, to deliver the feedback, and to hold your employees accountable. This accountability factor is mission critical if you're going to create a culture that's going to support strong performance management. But in order to create this, in order to ensure that culture of accountability exists, you've got to make sure that the coaching takes place on an ongoing basis. If you already have good dialogue with your employees, that's great. Take it up to the next level. If you haven't really established a good dialogue with your employees or an ongoing dialogue with your employees, now's a good time to start. Now, when you create the shift, you don't necessarily want to warn them. You can just start to do it. If you warn them and say, hey, I'm going to take a different approach, they may classify that as simply the program of the month, and they may just try and wait you out. So, be sensitive to that, be aware of that, but be sure you keep it going. With the accountability factor, if it's done right, it's going to increase performance. As people understand what they're doing and get the feedback, they like that, performance will improve. That which gets measured gets done. Right? So if employees recognize that you're measuring their performance, that you recognize what they're doing, and you share those specifics with them, they're going to pay attention to that, and it's going to help with the performance. But also that which gets measured and reported improves even more. And so when you get into the process of sharing feedback and documenting performance on a regular basis, then what happens is the employees will start to pay attention to what you're paying attention to. As you're adjusting and creating this new culture, keep in mind that culture takes time, but you are the key. You're the one that has to carry this forward. You can't wait for an invitation. You can't wait for the employees to come to you. You're the one who has to maintain the dialogue. You're the one that's got to maintain integrity on this, and you've got to be accountable to your staff to make sure that you do these things. But what's going to happen is that as you build this culture, it's going to take hold, and it's going to take your productivity and your performance up to a whole new level. The key to creating this culture is you, right? It's the example of the leader that people watch. You can say anything that you want, but they're going to watch what your actions are, and that's going to mean more. Your energy, your follow-up, your maintenance of the program, that's all going to come together. And so as you build this culture, then what happens is we get to that final step, right? We get to the appraisal piece. The appraisal is important and can be a great tool. It really can. Now, if you're absolutely perfect at your setting expectations, giving feedback, creating a culture of accountability, and you're documenting along the way, personally, you don't really need a performance appraisal. However, I have not seen a perfect performance management system done yet. So the performance appraisal is a great way to create a capstone for your process. So the qualities of your performance appraisal, no matter how it's written or what it's structured like, is that it's got to reflect the goals of your coaching. If the form that you're using is not congruent with the approach that you're taking, right, HR may not want to change the form, but there's nothing that says you can't add something to it. So if the form just isn't cutting it, pull out a sheet of paper and write one yourself. It should support the employees in their performance. It should drive peak performance, and it could be the catalyst for change as you structure this performance evaluation. So as you put together the form and you go through the process, remember that it's going to incorporate the coaching principles that we've talked about. It may take a while longer than what your previous form did, right? It can be simpler, it can be to the point, but what's going to happen is you're going to have to put a little bit more time in to really ensure that there's an understanding between you and the employee. Now, no matter what your specific forms look like, here's some recommendations on what should be involved in a performance appraisal system. The first step should be some kind of employee input process. Now, you may have a formal self-evaluation, you may call it something else. If you don't, I strongly encourage you to still go to the employee and explain what you want. You want the opportunity for the employee to share with you what they've done. What are their accomplishments for the past year? What are their strengths? What are they working on? Where do they want to go? What are some of the key things that they want to target with their career development? What are the core objectives that they think that should be worked on over the next year? This is a great opportunity for you to hear from them what they think. You know, they're the ones doing the job. They're the ones closest to it. This is an infinitely worthwhile opportunity to collect information about this. As you collect this information, right, typically from a form, I also strongly recommend that you have what I call an employee input meeting. This is where you spend a half hour, 45 minutes, and you listen. Have the employee walk through the sheet with them. Have them share with you what their thoughts are, where they think they need to go. Let them give you some feedback. Share with them some thoughts and insights, but really you want to sit back and be quiet. 90% of the discussion should be done by the employee. Acknowledge their input, but if you do disagree with what they're saying, don't acknowledge it at that time, right? You don't want to confront it, at least at that time. You can discuss it when you get to the next stage. But really the focus in this initial meeting, in this pre-evaluation meeting, is on the employee. So take the time to provide the employees with adequate time to share with you what their thoughts are. The next step is going to be the coaching phase. This is typically contained within your form, right? The supervisor evaluation form. Again, no matter what the format looks like, it should be focused on bringing together everything that you've talked about for the past year. There should be no surprises, right? If there's something that the employee should have been working on, you should have been talking about it already. There should not be any surprises lurking around in the performance evaluation that's going to be a surprise to the employee. Follow the SMART approach in giving feedback. Be honest, be straight with them. And I do recommend, passing it by your boss, your supervisor, if you need to get their input before you deliver it to the employee. As you get together for the meeting itself, you're going to do most of the talking, but you also want room for dialogue. You want to allow for the employee to throw in their input, to answer questions or to ask questions. Make sure that you check often for comprehension, that they're following with you, and remain positive. Even if there's some areas where you got to be working on, remember this: you still got to live with this person in the workplace. So be positive and focus on what the future looks like. But at the same time, you got to remember this: This evaluation is your perspective as the supervisor. It's not negotiable. It's a collection of your observations, your perspectives, and your evaluation, right, of their performance. And that's really where it's at. And that's how it's used as a coaching tool for future improvements. The third part of this is a professional or a personal development section. Now, you may include this in one of the other steps. You may do it separately, but this is really the section where you're going to talk about goals and objectives for the coming performance period. This is also an opportunity for you to tie in personal goals and professional goals and what they need to do and accomplish. You see, as we've mentioned before, here's a great time for you to be able to say, all right, here's where you're headed, here's where you want to go. Let's put the pieces in place to ensure that you have the resources, the training, the challenges that you need to go to the next level. But really the focus here is to help the employee understand what their goals and objectives are for the next year, clarify it, write out the SMART goals and objectives, and make sure that you're in agreement so this becomes your game plan for the next year. Now, more often than not, once the performance appraisal is done, and especially this professional development or personal development plan is set up, most supervisors that I know stick it in the drawer, and the first question they ask a year later is, where's that evaluation so I can see what was on it? That becomes pretty useless. This should be a document that is pulled out and reviewed on a regular basis throughout the year. At a minimum, you should have these stewardship meetings that may be at least on a quarterly basis where you can pull this thing out with your employee in a one-on-one basis and figure out where they're at, right? How are they doing with it? What are they doing? Where does it make sense? Document their performance, document their successes, document some challenges, and use this as a course correction opportunity if they're not quite meeting their goals. If they are meeting the goals and exceeding the goals, give them some compliments and keep on motivating them to push ahead. But really the entire goal of this performance appraisal process itself, right? The entire process itself is to really create alignment. You really want to open up communication lines between you and the employee. You want to be able to improve performance by improving the dialogue between you and that person in terms of your clarification of expectations, you're providing the feedback, getting input from them. This is all what it's going to take to create this culture of performance. So looking at that model one last time, again, performance appraisals by themselves, they won't work. However, if you first build the foundation of setting expectations and giving feedback on a consistent basis throughout the year, this is going to establish a culture of accountability. That culture is what's going to be necessary so that when you bring in the performance appraisal, it's going to serve as a capstone for the entire process to help you move ahead. So thank you for following the conversation. Again, this is a summarized version. Typically, we spend a half day on this where we help managers understand how to better communicate, how to get their point across, how to manage the performance in general. But I wanted to share these thoughts with you, and if they're useful to you, I hope that they serve you well. If you have any questions, let me know. Feel free to get a hold of me and be happy to discuss it further. Thanks.